give some reflections and some stories and some thoughts about Port Aransas that would be meaningful to people, not only now, but remember these tapes are now, these CDs, are now going to be there 40 years, 50 years, 100 years from now. So in terms of posterity, you know, what is it that you would like folks to remember, you know, about your family, about certain characters of the town, characteristics of the town, that maybe you'll only you and your generation know. So I think that's kind of what we're looking for. We're sketching out about 45, 50 minutes, but we're not married to that necessarily. That's the moment. And then if you don't mind, Mark, just grab a seat over there. And we are rolling now. My name is Guthri Ford. I'm here with my colleague, Mark Crichton, in the charming home of Marcy Mathews Ward Thomas, and Mr. Marcy Mathews is with her. Here at the table, these folks are the...
How about Manny?
Manny, excuse me.
Manny Work.
Manny and Marcy are the son and daughter of Kitty and Verda Mathews, and I will get the dates of birth and expiration for the record a little bit later. Do you remember offhand your dad's date of birth and death?
Yes, he was born September 28, 1990.
Okay, and expired?
I think it was the 13th of March, and
I don't
he's
remember.
been gone since.
I've got it written down somewhere, so I will get that. Yeah, I'll get that. Okay, folks, who would like to start telling us a bit about...
Well, I'd like to start with my grandpa, Tomas Andreas Yakosevich, better known as Tom Mathews, because he couldn't read or write, and when asked for his name, he wasn't able to spell it for the ship captain, so he said, how about I put you down as Tom Mathews? And that's how we got the name of Mathews, with one T. And Grandpa was from Austria, and he had run away from home when he was about 14 years old and shipped out of France on an English bark. And that's when he got the name of Thomas Mathews. And because the ship captain was able to translate Tomas and Andreas to Tom and Andrew, but didn't know what to do with the Yakosevich. So that's how we got our name. And now how we got to Port Aransas was because Grandpa was fishing out of Rockport. He had a home in Rockport, and he had, well, just before they came out here, they had my dad. So they had 10 kids all together. Dad was the baby. And he came out here in 1909 to put up a bar. He felt real sorry for the men who were building the jetties because they were all foreigners, didn't speak English. And the only saloon on the island was that at the Tarpon Inn Hotel. And they weren't welcome there because nobody could understand them, for one thing, and they just weren't welcome. So he felt bad about that and thought he could probably make a little money off of it. So he came out here to build a saloon, and then the people at the Tarpon Inn wouldn't allow it done. The Ellis family. So he took one of his fishing boats from Rockport and turned it into a floating saloon, called it the Deepwater Saloon, floated it out in the cove, and guys could wade out there or row a boat out there, and anyway, he had a floating saloon. It wasn't on land anymore. So he was able to run his saloon. He did it, apparently he was a good businessman, though he didn't read or write, because he made enough money to buy a house and have a home already established for his family when he brought them over here, which was probably in 1910.
Do you folks remember your granddad?
Not at
No, I was born before he died, but I was too little to remember him. And my mama took me in to see him, and at that time he had pretty bad problems with diabetes and was in the house where Jesse and Johnny and Dora and Bill and Mom and Dad and all of them, as they got married, they all moved into the same house together until my mom couldn't stand any more of it. She said, we've got to have our own place. So Dad bought a little house from Barney Farley. And so where was I going with that?
To keep the thought for a moment, let me ask Manny a question. In terms of where you were born and maybe Marcy, the family home, what was the first family home for Teddy and Brother?
The first home that they owned was the little house that she mentioned that Dad just bought. I mean, that Dad bought in about probably 1930, about 1930. And it was at the corner of Oleander and
I don't know the other street.
Oleander and Oak Street. Linda Mathews, Master Pole, has a trailer house on that corner right now. When my dad left that corner and moved out here to where across the street from where the grocery store is now, he eventually sold it to Linda's parents, and anyhow she inherited it from them. But that's where I was born.
I wasn't born there. I was born in a different house.
Marcy was born over on Mercer Street.
Yeah.
The second house.
No,
this
was a rental.
They moved before she was born because there were three families living in there. There was Dode and Bill Moore, there was Dad and Mama, and there was Johnny and Jesse Mathews, and they were living there, kind of a la the old country. In other words, Grandpa was still alive, and people, and they were his kids, and they were there.
Nuclear family.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so anyhow, they moved over to a house on Mercer Street, and that's where she was born.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were both born here on the island, as people always were.
And Mom took me to see my grandpa, and he told her, she's no good, Berka. She's too little. She's not of my stock. I proved him wrong. Still too little, but definitely of his stock. And I swear I heard him say that.
Well, in spite of the fact that he couldn't read or write, he could speak like 5 languages: German, Italian, Spanish, English, French, and he was a good businessman. He married a gal that was 15 or 20 years younger than him, and she had enough education that she was the bookkeeper, and he started out as a fisherman over in the Rockport area, Copano Bay, in that area, and then went into the pub business in Rockport before he came to
Say that again. The
into the bar business.
bar.
Yeah, and anyway, and then eventually, like Marcy said, he decided he's going to move to the island to take care of supply. He saw a good business. The people that were building the jetty were all foreigners. He could speak nearly all their languages, and so he put his bar out in the water and provided rowboats back and forth to it. And I guess if you got too drunk, you floated to shore.
And the woman he married over in the
Rockport
area was a Frontelet.
Right.
Frontelet.
Frontelet.
Yes, and younger, as I recall, than he. And she made the
She
move
was-
over here with him after he got established
Right.
and brought a number of kids with her.
Yes.
Was she 15 years or was she 30 years younger? She was quite a bit younger. than him. He outlived her. She contracted tuberculosis and died when she was 52 or 53 years old.
So here you all are,
So here we are.
born on Mustang Island,
Yeah, both
And-
of us.
ready to go to school and play in the dunes and
Oh, yes, we did.
Huckleberry Finn life.
We had a real Huckleberry Finn life. It was wonderful living out here before all the tourists came and everybody built houses. And it was wonderful.
Give us an
We
idea
had
of
the
that period.
whole beach to ourselves and could run up and down it in cars or old trucks, whatever we happened to have that we could beg, borrow, or somehow get it away from the house. So we could ride over the sand hills and up and down the beach, and we chased sand crabs. We chased rabbits. We chased coyotes. We chased everything with our old trucks, whatever we had. Dad had a Jeep pretty early on, and we did a lot of chasing in that. We didn't carry any guns with us. We just chased. And even got, one night we were out by the cemetery, and we got kind of spooked because there was somebody out there with big white gloves on. So we very carefully drove up to this person and found that it was a college student who was trying to catch kangaroo rats. And he was putting them in his pockets. Well, he hadn't caught any yet. So anyway, we got busy helping him and caught 20 kangaroo rats, and he was getting paid very well for each kangaroo rat because they were disease free. You know, something that's supposed to really be good in a laboratory.
I don't know whether, was that when we learned that there were kangaroo rats out there?
No, we knew there were kangaroo rats out there all the time.
One of the things
But
that,
they were hard to catch because you had to chase them on foot,
well, that's true.
and you had to, they always hid under the cactus,
Yeah.
and you run into the cactus, and
That's
you knew
true.
you'd had a bad luck.
One of the things about having automobiles was that once a car got on the island, then it was here. No license, no tags were bought for it, no insurance was provided. My daddy taught me, or rather this gal taught me how to drive when I was 11 years old. And I put about 4 pillows under me and went to the grocery store and went to the post office, and that's the way we got around.
I was about 12 when I learned to drive.
And this thing, she didn't carry any guns with her, but I had an old car one time that I brought over from Corpus, paid $85 for it. Brought it to the island. Took the doors off, cut the sides out. It was a '36 Ford 2-door sedan, and Mackie Moore, Dora and Bill's youngest son, split that $85 with me, $42.50 a piece. And anyhow, we made a coyote hunting car out of it, and we carried guns and went down around where the golf course is now, and that's where we do our coyote hunting.
And the period we're talking about would be in the 1930s?
No, no. This
No, a little
I
later.
was 15 years old when I bought that thing, and I was born in '34, so
I was
puts it
born in
kinda
31.
mid-50s.
Okay, mid-50s.
Mid-50s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the reason you hunted coyotes was it was fun, or was there any kind of bounty on them?
There was no bounty. It was fun. We hunted coyotes, jackrabbits, geese.
I didn't want anybody shooting anything, so my vehicles never carried any
And the
guns.
reason I ask is that we have some pictures of Bill Sims' daddy, Billy Sims,
That's way before us, though.
and they used to hunt coyotes from the airplane.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Billy.
And that was just great sport. And
Yeah.
there's a picture of all these coyotes hanging under the wings after they landed.
I remember
Mm-hmm.
his airplane, and I was real enthralled with it. I never got to take a flight in it or anything, but I do remember going out there and watching Billy take off in his airplane and lighting his airplane. I don't remember anything about hunting or anything, but I know that he took my mother for a little jaunt one time, scared her to death. She swore to stay on the ground the rest of her life. But anyhow, I guess that he had it until the war broke out, and I don't know what did happen to it. But anyhow, he was pretty well known for his ability to fly an airplane.
Tell us a little bit about the war years. you were born in 34, so you were
30.
7 or 8. You remember the start of the war, I'm
Mhm.
sure.
Oh, yeah, I
You,
remember.
you definitely,
31.
you definitely remember
Yeah.
the Great War. And
I remember all this news coming over the radio. Of course, the only entertainment we had at home was the radio,
Radio.
and we listened to it every evening. And I did my schoolwork. He didn't really do his schoolwork. He kind of played around. But anyway,
There's a lot of wallering on the floor.
we heard the news, and Mama got upset and started crying and telling Dad, "You're not going to go off and leave me." And because so many of the island men immediately joined one of the services,
Yeah.
either sailors or Navy or
Some of them
Army
joined
or
the
something.
Merchant Marines, and some of them.
Yeah, went
others
into the
joined
Merchant Marines,
Navy.
but they all took off and left this island without any men except my dad. And my dad, in order to avoid the draft, took on jobs that kept him called necessary to the island.
Strategic job.
Strategic jobs.
And it wasn't so much that he was dodging the draft as it was keeping peace with their mother. Didn't want to be left alone. And Bob Miller, if y'all remember Anna Miller, was the chief engineer at the power plant when the war broke out. And after the war was going for about 6 months, he joined the Merchant Marines, and he asked Dad if he would like to take his job. And so Mama pushed Dad to get that job, which he did. And at that time, since Dad already had a couple of kids, he was kind of exempt from some of the early drafting. But anyway, he took that job and kept it for about 2.5 or 3 years.
Now that power plant is the one that Gail Borden Munsell built on C, was it? Where was it located on?
Right down from where Leonard Walker's old house is
Okay,
today.
so almost everything that they did was the
Right there
telephone
on
company and the
And the-
power plant, the ice plant, okay.
The water,
It's all
the
together.
water, and all that. One of the reasons it was strategic is that the Army and the Navy and the Coast Guard all had places out here in the island, and the Army was over off 11th Street, down right in front of where Virginia Carn has her place right now, and that was all Army camp in there. And part of Dad's job was to see to it that they had electricity and that they had some kind of water supply. And
could you give us another way of describing the Army area other than that? Is
well,
it UTMSI relative to, for example?
it went from about. Y'all know my daughter Claire. Do you know where she and Rick live?
No.
Rick Adams lives.
Yeah.
Okay. Right there, the road jumps off as down to go in front of his house and past the Belcher house and then past Virginia's house, and all of that area was Army camp, and it went all the way over to where the hills are that have the artillery in them. That was all Army camp, and it was just spread out with tents and temporary buildings and
Dugouts.
and where the track field is, that was all Army camp, and around that was a big pond down in that area, and it was just spread out all over.
Oh, by the way, to the machine, the power plant they're talking about was a power plant that created electricity from the island by diesel generators.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
Mhm.
So,
And two big diesel engines in there. One is a 2-cylinder and one's a 3-cylinder. And they made a noise that was just, you just got used to it. It just didn't even bother you. Like people would come to the island and want to know how we could stand it, and we say, stand what? And they'd say, well, that noise. Well, that noise. I remember this discussion with my parents. And that racket, anyhow, finally figured out they'd talk about the power plant. And if they weren't talking about the power plant, they were talking about the noise that they could hear from the Gulf out there. That
From the
out there
surf.
we couldn't.
What's that noise?
Now the fuel, diesel fuel that came in, Was that brought by barge from Aransas Pass, or how did they get the fuel to
No,
that?
I don't remember how that got here. I think, I just don't know. I'd have to make up a story to tell you how that happened. But they had trucks, I believe, that were similar to some of the gasoline trucks you see today, probably smaller, that brought the diesel fuel over and put it into underground tanks that sat right beside the power plant.
Manny, do you remember when the island got CPL electricity, in other words, from a Corpus hydroelectric plant?
I remember when it happened. I'm not sure about the date. By the time I started to college, and that was '53, we had CPL electricity, and so. But I don't know when.
I
I'd
don't
say
remember.
1950, maybe,
Uh-huh.
somewhere along in there.
Right.
And Gil Munsell, of course, passed away. And when I remember my dad working for the facility, it was it was still owned by his widow, Billy McNamara, Pat McNamara's mother, who later married Tom McNamara, and that's where the name came from. But anyway, she was his widow and owned the place, and Boone Walker and Leonard Walker moved over here from Corpus Christi to run it for her. And Dad's boss was Boone Walker, which is Jeffrey or J.G. Gantz.
Jeffrey Gant, Jack Gant.
Jack Gantz.
Do you know Jack Gant? Plays music out here.
Jack Gantz.
Well, he did.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
those were the sons of Leonard Walker's sister Genevieve, and they called Leonard Walker City for they couldn't say sister, so they called her Aunt City, and they lived here a long time. The Gants didn't live here. They came to visit, and Leonard would often take them for a summer and keep those kids all summer long. And they had more fun with her. She played like a kid on the beach and in the sand hills and wherever.
And the reason
And
it
she
seems
painted.
that we remember that was that during most of the time when you ran into Leonard Walker, she was absolutely a perfect lady until the summertime got here and those kids showed up, and I mean, she just partied with the rest of them.
Speaking of businesses, maybe one of the most obvious businesses the Mathews were involved in was the store down by the waterfront, because they had the name written on the roof, so it's pretty obvious. Could you tell us a little bit of what you remember about the history of Mathews on the waterfront?
I have it written, and I'll.
While she's doing that, Manny, what do you recall about that business?
Well, the first time I remember anything really about the business was Barney Farley was running it for my uncle, my dad's brother, the man that built it and established it. He established it as a restaurant.
That would be Sims Mathews?
Yes, Mathews. And the name of it was Silver King at that time, the restaurant. And that's the first time I remember it, though, was when Barney Farley was running it, and my dad was down on the dock doing something in the boat, and Barney walked down and said hello to him, and then I got to talking to Barney as a little kid, and he wanted to know if I wanted to go with him, and I said, where are you going? He said, oh, up to he said, to the store, and I thought he meant to Golden's grocery store. Instead, he was just going back to the store. So anyhow, I went with him, and I was disappointed by the trip because I didn't get to get in the car and go someplace. But it was a tackle store at that time already, and I was probably 5 years old, so that's probably 39, something like that.
Well, I've written here that in August 20, 1928, St. Matthews purchased from the Willard Young estate the 5 acres of land which ran from Cotter Street, bordering on Trask Street, to the water's edge. At the time of this purchase, Mr. Young was owner of United States Steel and resided in Manhattan, New York. Mr. Young had purchased this land from the state of Texas only 2 or 3 years before selling it to Sim. Mr. Ed Cotter was overseer of the Young estate at Port Aransas. After the 1919 hurricane, Ed Cotter leased some of the Young property to the city of Port Aransas to be used as a site for the city's municipal dock.
Hang on, because you can give me this.
Okay.
And you know, I can put that in the file with your interview here.
Okay.
But tell us a little bit about what you remember regarding sort of the evolution of that business. I remember it started off
As a restaurant.
As a restaurant.
But Uncle Sim's 8-year-old son fell overboard and drowned, Manny Mathews. And it just tore Uncle Sim up. He closed the Silver King down and just left all the food in the refrigerators and everything, and didn't open it until I guess
I
was
think
it
probably when
till
Barney
Barney
took it over.
and then it was tackled. It was a place where people went to charter boats and fishing guides, and so it was a sports center.
Must have been when Barney's was written on the roof.
Right.
Right. Barney's was written on
What
the-
year was that? Sim started it in 28, you said.
Mhm.
Or he bought
They
the
bought
land.
the
in
land in 28.
So he probably built it, so was he doing that for a while? Or
I think for sure in about 1938 or 39, Barney was running it. And he ran it until Uncle Sim, he and Uncle Sim had some kind of a disagreement. Both of them were pretty much, I want to be the boss kind of people. And even though Sim turned the business over to Barney, he still wanted to have his finger in the pie, and Barney wanted to do it otherwise. And so Barney got out of there sometime about the first year or so of the war, of World War II. And the building was actually closed for 2 or 3 years during the war. And then it was finally opened back up again. The war was still going when it was open, but it had been closed for a year or so.
now, it occurs to me that Sim saw opportunities and did something about it.
Yes.
Yes, he did.
Your dad did the same thing. He's
Yes,
a
he did.
hard worker, and saw a lot of opportunities, and didn't just sit back, he did something about it.
No.
Did they get that from your grandfather? Well, you know,
I'm
is
sure
that
they
a trait
must
that runs
have.
through the family?
Yeah.
Um,
Because Dodie, then their sister Dora, ran Matthews for years.
Yeah, when it was reopened, Dora and Bill ran it. And now Sim died in 45, and
Yeah, trust
Doe
my
was already
original to
running
you.
the place.
I will expect you to bring it back to me.
And his widow, Vera, who was Florine Owsley's mother, was in partnership with the Moores. The Moores ran it. She provided the location, and it was kind of, you run it, do it. And Aunt Vera was a person, okay, you're going to do it, you do it. And so everything went along very well up until probably in the late 50s, early 60s. Bill Moore and Dora got out of there and went down and opened up the service station.
Bill Moore's.
It's on Station Street right now.
Certainly another well-advertised Mathews in Port Aransas was your dad.
Matthews Construction Company.
That and the photographs with President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Right.
You can't miss Teddy Mathews in the
No, you can't.
fish catching and at the dock with the president. Tell us a little bit of what you recall, stories about that.
Well,
famous
I
trip.
recall that Dad told my mom not to come to the waterfront when he was fishing with the president because he didn't want any big show or hullabaloo over anything he was doing. He wanted to just be completely left alone. And then they had movies. They were taking movies all the time. that he was fishing the president, and he said the president didn't even get to land the fish. We had to drag it to death to keep going back and doing things over so they could video, or not video, but
Film.
yeah, film it.
Film.
And so we did go down there.
Yeah, we did.
Mom took us down there, and we stood back in the crowd and just looked at the president, but at least we got to see him.
Mama was a lady that didn't really argue with my dad, and
She did
and
too.
he pretty much kept his mouth shut too. But they both pretty much did what they wanted to do when the time came. And I remember going down there. I remember being back away from the boat. And one of the things that my mother heard and told afterwards was that there was a young boy on the dock that scrambled down to the second level where the boat was docked, and was able to say to the president, "Mr. President, would you shake my hand?" And Roosevelt said, "Well, I sure will." And so that little boy got on the boat and got down there and shook the president's hand. And there's no picture of that or anything, but anyhow. And she was mighty impressed with the kindness of the president toward that little boy. And,
I remember that.
and there were people all over the dock. I oddly, for some reason, remember what my mother had on that day. And I don't know if you remember or not, but Mama had always wore slacks if she could, and a white blouse, and she was all dolled up just in case. And the slacks were something that were in fashion at the time for the ladies. Anyway.
There's a piece of, I think, misinformation out about the president's trips to Port Aransas, and it says that he made multiple fishing trips here.
He made one. That was it.
One's all that I've.
So I just want that for the record. You
Yeah.
weren't saying
What-
that.
I only made that one trip here.
He made the one trip here, but he had multiple guides or multiple boatmen. He had one guide, that was Barney Farley. And the boatmen, there was my dad, there was Don Farley, and there was Ed Tarrant. And Tarrant, it's my understanding, went to Brownsville in his boat and took the president fishing out of the port of Brownsville when they got down there. Don Farley took the president fishing the first day that he fished. He fished, I think, 3 days here. He took him fishing the first day. Dad took him the second day, and Don took him the third day. And it just so happened that all of the press showed up mostly on the day that Dad took him fishing. And although there are some pictures, quite a few that I've seen of Don in his boat that looked very much like the boat that Dad had. And,
Was Don's boat a little longer than
no, I think they were almost
About identical?
It could have been a little longer, but one of the boats, Dad's boat, of course, was the Manny. I don't know what Don called his boat. And then there was
Grampus,
the
wasn't it?
Grampus that of
Or was
Seminole,
that later?
which was a bigger boat, which was probably 3 to 4 feet longer. But it was also
So just so we have it for the record, the Manny is the boat that's now in the museum.
right.
Yes, but that's not the boat that the president went fishing in.
Different Manny.
Yes.
No, it was the Marcy.
That's right. I'm sorry. That was
It was a different
the
Farley boat.
that's in the pictures is the Marcy boat. That's right.
Yeah. Dad never put my name on it, but he told me that it was the Marcy. And when he built his new boat, he named it Manny, and I was really upset because Manny could not.
Even read the name.
He couldn't. He
you wouldn't do
couldn't
your
go
homework.
swimming. He couldn't go fishing for anything in the world. He got seasick standing on the dock.
One of the first things I remember about the Manny boat is being taken fishing, and it was structured in such a way that it had a deep transom at the time, or it was wasn't high like it ended up being. And the engine hatch set up pretty high on the floor. And I remember sitting on that engine hatch with my head going round and round and round. Now, that thing was made in 39. I was born in 34, so I was 5 years old. And I remember getting sick and throwing up on that boat. And so that ruined me. That took care of me until I got married and had to make a living. And I was looking for something to do during the summer because I was teaching school, and my take-home pay was like $224 a month. And I could make $40 a day fishing, so I got me a license and put the Manny boat back in the water and went fishing on it and kept my eyes on the horizon and took Marazine and never did get sick.
Your dad had some very special relationships with folks who weren't, they were more than tourists. They were folks that came to this island, had been
Yes.
coming here a long time, and I'm aware of one or two special relationships. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the families that Teddy
Yes,
and you
well,
all got to know?
The most important one was Joe Frost. He came down here for years, built a house down here, and he and Dad were, well, Dad wasn't like an employee. He was more like a friend with Joe Frost, and they hunted together, and they fished together, and they went up in the airplane together, and looked for fish and surf.
They won the rodeo together.
And they just were always together. And Joe's wife came down here. I don't remember what her name is, but Helen Frost. And he was always talking about how he and Helen had such a good relationship. They were like Granny and Dad were, my mom and Dad, Ted and Berta. But actually, Joe Frost often had women down here that he was hiding from everybody, and it would really make my dad angry because he liked Helen and he couldn't see Joe fooling around on her.
But the other person that he had a close relationship with was a guy by the name of Ed Bassey. He used to own all the Piggly Wiggly stores up in San Antonio. And the last time that he ever went deer hunting, I took him deer hunting down in the Uvalde area on one of the Bassey ranches down there. He was invited to come down. And
That was Ed Bassey.
that was it. And Ed remained a good friend until
And
Fred Malley, Ed Massey, and your dad did a video of,
yes,
of catching tarpon.
yes, I have a copy of it. Mm-hmm.
yeah. That
And Fred-
is that the video that Ed sent us?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And for the record, the Joe Frost we're referring to is Mr. Joe Frost of San Antonio, Texas, and part of the Frost banking family.
Right. And Joe was a good guy.
Yes, he was.
He was.
I liked him a lot.
He was just as honest and upfront about who he was and what he did for a living as he could be. When my dad went to work for him, he was still running a construction company at the time. And Joe told him that if he would go to work for him, that he would guarantee him a job for life. And so anyway, Dad closed his business down, went to work for Joe, until the day Dad died. He received a monthly, finally it was called a gift, from the Frost estate. And I don't know whether there was anything in writing about it. As far as we knew, it was something Joe Frost gave his word that Dad would have a job for life, and he had a job for life. It was just that simple.
In the amount of about $667,
Right,
as I recall. So it was a sizable annuity.
Right.
Yeah, it was.
for that time, it certainly was.
And anyway, it was something that not only did Joe live up to, but the estate lived up to. That would be Joe III.
What were some of your dad's disappointments about Mustang Island, about Port Aransas? Did he have a pet peeve? Did he have some regrets that the island wasn't going a certain way or was going a certain way? Can you
Well,
remember
the
that?
only thing that really upset him was that a relative went into the construction business too, and that was Melvin Littleton. And when Melvin did that, Dad said, I'm closing my business down because I'm not going to be in competition with relatives. Because Melvin Littleton had married Maurice Merkovich, and that meant kin. And so that was a disappointment to Dad in a way. I think that he might have been getting tired of the construction business anyway and was glad to go to work for Joe Frost.
Yeah,
He retired, in other words.
He was glad
And
to get
just-
out of it.
Yeah,
And
because it was, he'd go down to the valley and go to the auctions that they had for selling Army equipment, and that's where he got his trucks and machinery.
some
You
of
remember
them-
that?
Some of them, yes.
Some of them. Got some in Kansas. I helped him drive back one time from Kansas in a truck that he bought.
About what year would you say, more or less, that Teddy moved away from the construction business to not have the competition with Littleton and moved into the Frost
63.
in the early 60s, 63. 63, so there's the year.
I was married in 62, and that was actually 62. That was the year that he got out of the business.
Now, when was the house built that would have been on the northwest corner of G and Station? That we
We
think of
moved out there when I was a little kid. Probably in about-
1937.
Yeah,
37. I
so
remember
that was-
the move.
yeah.
And that house is now where Mackey is. Was that was moved there
No.
on?
No, that
That-
house was torn down.
Oh, okay.
That house caught fire. The gas company bought that house that we had lived in, and it caught fire and burned. But the house that my dad ended up with belonged to the Hall family from Beeville, and they owned the Rialto and Rex and theaters in Texas. And they had their house was right across the street from our house. We were both on the corner of Station and Avenue G, and they were on that side, we were on this side. And anyway, their house caught fire, and they gave it to my dad to hold it away.
Yeah, he made a deal with him. He had a piece of property out there where Maggie's house is now, and it was an exact replica of the house that we were living in. And so he picked it up, moved it out there, and rented it for, had it as a rent property for a long time. And then when he finally got tired of the traffic and stuff going down Avenue G, they were able to sell this house over here and then move out to the other place.
To Pat McGee.
And I said 62 a while ago. It was 60. It was 62. I ran the construction company for him for the first year that he worked for Joe Frost, so that he can make up his mind for sure whether or not he wanted to do that. Anyway, I ran it for a year, and then
I did all the bookkeeping.
I was offered a job with the school district over here, and so anyway, I shut her down because okay.
Did Mathews Construction sell the equipment? Did you sell your?
It was a kind of a piecemeal thing. It was up to Dad. It was all his equipment. One of the things we talked about Melvin Littleton a while ago. Melvin, he had a little dredge boat that he had made. And Melvin came and looked at the dredge and was almost
Dad had
ready
made the
to-
dredge, not Melvin.
yeah. Looked at the dredge and offered Dad some money for it. Dad figured it wasn't enough money, so he turned it down. And eventually the dredge was just cut to pieces and just sold that way. But the trucks were sold piece by piece. The maintainer was sold. I think maybe Melvin did buy the maintainer. The shed eventually was sold with the house. Sold the house. And just disposed of a little bit of that.
Let's start thinking about a story or two. Whether it's far-fetched or not, I don't care. Because folklore is an important part of history. It's a little separate eddy and stream of history, but it's an important one. And Manny, do you ever think back on a story or two that you might have shared with your kids, or not shared with your kids, that you would that you'd want to share with people 30, 40 years from now?
Getting back to that $85 automobile, the cousin that I bought it with, Mackie Moore and I, were both working for my dad on the dredge boat that summer, and we were digging out he was dredging out the basin where down in front of Woody's boat basin, and where the Tarpon Street, I think they call it Tarpon Street Restaurant is, and anyway. And Mackie and I shared the vehicle, and the day that I would work, he would have a car, and the day that he would work, I would have a car, and but he was pretty hard on it, you know, and I kept trying to get him to sell his $45 part of it to me, $42.50, and so he wouldn't do it. But anyhow, we were out coaching one day, out kind of where the water tanks are anymore. Out toward the flats, and we got kind of excited. We chased the coyote completely off the main part of the hill down to the flats, and the old car just sunk down all four tires. And so we got out and walked around it. Mackie was doing the driving, and I'd been trying to get him to sell me the car. So he said, "Frederick," he said, "I'll sell you this car." So I happened to have $42.50 in my pocket, and I paid him right down there, and he walked home, and I walked home. But anyhow, my dad had a drag line, and some things that I needed. We ran the line out to it and drug it out back out. So that's how I ended up being full owner of that vehicle. And actually, we were running on what was called the airport at that time. There were Burris feed mills. Mr. Burris had a airplane he used to fly in out there, and it was an oyster shell bed road that he would land his DC-3 on, and bring all of his people down here, including the light crust doughboys and all that.
Now, he built what we know as Summer Place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now the airport was out near, or on the way to the dump, I guess, off of that area over there.
Yeah, kinda
Port,
out there.
not port, but
Kinda out there where the trailer camp is, off the cut-off road, and where the swimming pool and all that stuff is, out in that area. There was an airstrip.
Right.
That's where I first remember.
Ross Avenue, that's what I'm thinking of, but it would be where Ross Avenue is now, and it literally cut across Ross's from looking at the old charts.
Yeah, probably you're right. In fact, I'm sure you're right. I just don't, it's not strung in my brain that way, you know. But the airport did go, the airstrip did go right to the end of the grassy area and where the flats started, and that's how I ended up out there, because we were chasing that coyote down that airstrip, and went off in the middle of that.
The runway still does, goes right into the flats.
Does it?
Yeah, you can do the same thing today. You remember a story? I'll come back in a second, Manny. I don't want you to forget to tell that story about the SS Worthington, the old ship that was pulled in here, and the cat.
The John Worthington.
The John Worthington.
Yeah, there was a ship torpedoed out in the Gulf, and they ended up bringing it in and here to Port Aransas, and Dad was busy helping with it somehow. Anyway, there was a cat on the ship, the ship's cat, and Dad brought the ship's cat home to our house, and that was the meanest cat I ever knew. It would go after Manny and me and scratch us and bite us, but it liked men all right because it had never been around children and women. So it was a monster cat. It was a big old blue cat, big pretty male cat.
Oh, you remember how he got his name?
How?
Remember what his name was? His name
Buglebooch.
was Bugs. Yeah, Buglebooch. And the reason, the way the name got established was that our aunt, Opal Marcy, was hanging out at our house one day, and Dad had brought that cat in, and it didn't pay any attention to kitty, 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 or anything like that, or anything that you'd think it. And so she was making up words, and all of a sudden she said Buglebooch, and the cat just jumped in her lap. And so evidently it sounded something like the language that was spoken on that ship. And so we shortened the name to Bugs.
Yeah.
Do you remember when the ship was above water over by the St. Joe?
Oh
They
yes,
told
I
it-
remember
do you
when it was
remember when
above
it
water
was?
because Dad fished over there quite a bit.
I remember how it got there.
I remember how it got there too.
Remember? It was tied up over at Harbor Island, and it was partly disassembled there. And then after they got what they figured was everything that was of any value off of it and sold it at auction or whatever, we ended up with doorknobs and ports and first one thing then another. Anyhow, it was drugged up in front of the lighthouse and was dynamited until it set down in the water. And once they figured it was going to stay there, then that was it. It just stayed there. An old man by the name of Mert Coleman, who was in the salvage operations for years around here, would go over there and cut off a big chunk of it and put it in the back of his truck and take it over and sell it for scrap metal. And I've still got a latch off the John Worthington. I don't know the museum is interested in it or not. Do y'all have any parts of the John Worthington?
When we come up with our exhibit on war, the war eras, I'll let you know and just loan it to the museum for
Okay.
a month or
Be
two.
glad to. Be glad to.
Yeah, we'll put it in a special box.
Okay.
Something that's interesting to me is what Opal used to do. She was a telephone operator, right? And you had some experience
Yes.
there. Maybe you
She
could-
taught me to work the switchboard by the time I was 9 years old. And she was a chief telephone operator as well as Boom Walker's secretary. She kept the books for Boom Walker for the utility company out here, which was owned by Billy Munsell, later to become Mrs. McNamara. So where was I going with this?
Well, some of the stories,
anything about Marcy or about the phone company?
So anyway, whenever somebody needed off for a couple hours, something like that, Aunt Opal would have me come over and sit at the switchboard, and it was one position board, little bitty board, and it had plugs that you plugged into the little flap would fall down on the numbers when they would ring, and it would ring in, and you would plug it in. Well, in the summer times, it was kind of easy to run out of plugs and not be able to plug somebody in, and so they could be real ugly about it, especially Woody Owsley was hateful as he could be. Billy Smith was sweet. I loved working for him. He was a real good man. He was never got mad at the telephone operators, but Woody Owsley did. And accused us of being asleep or being in the bathroom or reading a book or something of that sort, and not paying any attention to the switchboard. But it was pretty intense. So we only worked 6 hours at a time because you were there alone, and those things just kept ringing and buzzing. And then when they would ask for long distance, you'd have to get a route from the telephone operators in Corpus Christi for you to follow, and you'd have to go from one city to another, like on a map, to get your telephone call through. And that would take a long time to do that, going from one station to another. And so one day an old man came in and he wanted to know how much it would cost him to call a certain place. And I said, I don't know and I don't care. And so he went over and told my Aunt Opal about it, and she came over to see what was going on. But I had so many tickets stacked up. Long distance telephone calls, people waiting on their calls to go through because you had to follow this map. And it was difficult, you know, to keep up with where you're supposed to be going. And I don't remember if we would write it down on the ticket or what, but then that told you how much to charge for the telephone call. Also, you got that rate from somebody in Corpus Christi. I was sitting on the switchboard one day when Leonard Walker's little nephews were out playing, and they turned the water hose on me. And I was sitting at the...
Just Jack, yeah, etc. Jack.
Yeah, and I tell you, my headphones flew off and the tickets went all over. That almost fried me, I guess. You know, scared the hell out of me. And then they always got mad at Billy's son. Not Pat, but the other one. Tommy. They always got mad at Tommy and blamed him for everything. So I went running out there and said it was not Tommy that was holding the hose, it was JG. So then I picked up all those tickets and got them sorted back out by time and everything, and sat down and started working the switchboard again.
I was never